Take my pain and make it something beautiful.
So welcome back to How to Create Your Own Equity. Today we have a little bit of a tongue-in-cheek look at DOGE or DOGE. And it's all about global efficiency. We are more globally interconnected than you think. This theme has been throughout history, and it's just not the states that are using this in order to move from the center to more polarized sections of society. So this came up when I was listening to Trump in the Oval Office and Musk, and they used this very suave pronunciation of what I would say was DOGE. So let's have a little listen.
We're going to be signing a very important deal today. It's DOGE, and I'm going to ask Elon to tell you a little bit about it. And
yes, DOGE. He suddenly took on a little bit of French. It was like I just spat my tea out thinking, what is this thing? And of course, I knew what the acronym stood for, Department of Government Efficiency. But what's happened is there have been ruthless cuts come in and made by a very interesting team. Now, one of the other things that Musk pointed to was trying to justify why this is needed, that he was going to go through great transparency, and that the key component was character and competence. Have a listen.
What are the two ingredients that are really necessary in order to cut the budget deficit in half from 2 trillion to 1 trillion? And it's really two things: competence and caring. And if you add competence and caring, you'll cut the budget deficit in half. And I fully expect to be scrutinized and get a daily proctology exam.
So I find it super interesting when we talk about character and we talk about competence. Number one, head of the snake, Trump, found guilty in the hush money case. Then he talks about the suppression of complaint. If we think about Tesla and we look at cases where complaints have been suppressed, when errors have been found if you try to reach customer service, as exposed by Reuters, you've also got those traits within Musk himself, who has fathered numerous kids and not been there. Character and competence. And let's actually just go to character and competence and look at one of their team, the 21-year-old that Bloomberg has linked to the reported leak of cybersecurity information. That's why he was let go from his previous company. Not just that alone, independent journalist Jakob Silverman has linked him to be the grandson of a KGB spy. So this goes deep in terms of character and competence. And let's take a little bit of a step back when he goes into the examples in the Oval Office of what he's dealing with and what's going on. He's talking about missing fields of data in finance. He's talking about the lack of rules and structure within the systems. Now, for someone that's worked in transformation for a very long time, these things are not just a young team coming in and scaring the hell out of people, and as you'll hear in a minute, purposely putting them through trauma. That just creates the very thing that you don't want, because this is cultural transformation. This is about how we work and ways of working and behaviors and training about what you put in fields in any ERP system. And we don't know if there was a lack of funding in systems that required that, because as many companies are moving into transformation, what's key is your data and your data quality, yes. But having people come in and firing and putting people on leave or illegally firing is not the answer. And then we look at the fact that they want to be transparent. Now, it's seemingly transparent in what they're doing, but when people ask questions behind, we'll come on to that. But in their transparency and their lack of competence, they have managed to have their website hacked, leaking trade secrets. These are not people that are used to dealing with this clearance level. right? So if I was to go and work in government in another country, I have to have a certain clearance level. I need to know exactly what I'm doing in this field. And again, this did not go out to private tender. So the transparency and the lack of competence is actually completely opposite, which was presented in the Oval Office. So this time, before we go broader geographically, let's take a little bit of depth historically. This is not the first political leader to take up the dodgy efficiency bandwagon. Reagan did in 1984. And he came up with 23,000 pages of cuts and over 4,000 recommendations, of which only 27% of them had any chance of going through. In the end, it was a huge failure. He ended up tripling the deficit by the time he left office. All of the charade also had its theatrics, a $436 claw hammer and a $511 light bulb. So the theatrics have always been there. Of course, it's popular to say, hey, I'm going to save you money, and here's a dividend that might be coming. But actually, we need to keep our eye on the prize, which we're going to in a minute. So let's just stay a little bit historically around as well the pronunciation of DOGE, dodgy. And to say I'm not just making this up, listen to this.
Postulated by certain sources of the period that the DOGE may have in fact been poisoned in 1485. Thereafter, Marco...
Here the history that led Leonardo Loredan back in 1516, the Doge of Venice, and the Venetian Senate.
So the Doge of Venice. And what's really interesting to me, if you don't know why, it's just a little bit dodgy, and that really says exactly what it is. But hey, they both started to say douche, and I do wonder whether there is a context or purposeful movement away from slipping up and having that Freudian slip. It's almost as if Melina was walking by and said, Donald, I'm going for a douche. And they both went, we don't need to call it dodge. We can call it douche, and no one will think we are dodgy. And what is a douche, you may ask? Well, if you're used to air kissing, you may be douching to get what you want.
I'm a fucking douche. You know how long I've been waiting up in this motherfucker? I was starting to worry the guys didn't want douches no more, but ha! Look at her. She's a fucking 10.
Clearly, some people still want douches. Great on Netflix, by the way. Be careful how old your children are if they're going to watch it. It's hilarious. I don't know what the people were on when they were making that. We move a little bit forward and we say, what would not be dodgy about taking 8 million a day? If I gave you 277 million, Trump, for your campaign, I expect a little bit of return on investment. Let's pay some of that money back.
I think that's a bit dodgy, mate.
Yeah, that's what we'd say in the UK. I think that's a bit dodgy. Yeah. But actually, what I really loved was Rep. Mr. Casa giving it as it is.
In the very first ever DOGE oversight hearing.
I'll ask you, Mr. Talcove, do you know how much money a day Mr. Musk will receive from the federal government for his contracts?
No.
The answer is $8 million a day. Ms. Royal, do you know how much the average person in this country who survives on Social Security, one of our seniors who's worked their entire life, about how much they have to survive on a day?
I do not.
$65 a day. We're not looking into Elon Musk's $8 million a day. This subcommittee, chaired by Marjorie Taylor Greene and the House Republicans, is looking into your grandmother's $65 a day.
And then he nails it. He nails it. It's that 1% wanting more and more and more greed. And the only way that they can get to you is division, dividing between who has and who doesn't have, and maybe you can't have, and going to hugely populist methods and themes that actually want more efficiency and effectiveness, as I'm going to show you. But what you're doing and how you're doing it is different. There is this manipulation of the people by the 1%. So when I say what you're doing and how you're doing it, typically you would have to go through a process in which to come in and even do this type of work and have a level of clearance to make sure, as Musk said, you have the competence and character. And already they've displayed that they do not, in terms of the security leaks, in terms of the not following of due process, which will likely cost them because of the illegal firings. And what are they turning up? They're turning up and questioning things which we'll come on to, which were actually put in by Trump. These mass firings are shattering and adding more layoffs into an economy which is already broken. There have been successive layoffs by companies who are so short-term shareholder focused to save money and to save costs, which may not even be able to deliver what they need to for the long term because they're not thinking long term strategically in the West anymore. They're not thinking in those cycles because CEOs are only in for a short period of time and they're making decisions for share price. Now, yes, the government is different and typically is long term, and I'm not saying there isn't efficiency and effectiveness to get there, but 75,000 US federal workers have taken that brunt, and nearly 10,000 have been let go. And whether they were legal or not is a question. And they are from departments which you may very well need within the future, as I mentioned before, from environment and infrastructure. If you are having to amend your grid for new technologies like hybrid cars, for AI, for solar, you are going to need these very people with the expertise that you are letting go. And that has just gone. All of that tacit knowledge, because not only are fields within systems not put in, that knowledge that people have within their heads isn't necessarily written down as they are let go out the door. And in some cases, their badges didn't work. It's not even that they were let go. We've already had the callback for that tacit expertise, for example, in bird flu. There was a letting go of people and now the need to rehire them. So you've already got some of that waste creeping in. These kind of requests and this chaos being put in, of course, there are people standing up to power. Thank you. But we need to protect these people. We need to protect Letitia James, the bold, strong leadership coming from women. Let's protect them because there are a whole load of other leaders falling like a house of cards who are challenging the very principles that as far as I understand, many of us do not stand for, and I hope many of us do not stand for. There is still a rule of law, even though Trump at the moment is questioning that there are people standing up to protect privacy, to protect laws which are in place, and you cannot just come with a dictatorship, with a dystopian authoritarian attempt to take over and one person just do what they want against the will of the people. So if anything is DOGE, we need to look at what might the setup be when we think about dodgy style. When we think about that dodgy style of the dodgy coin. While you're flicked forward for a perhaps 5,000 dividend, I don't know who's going to have sparkle in their eyes. How long will that 5,000 last? How much will that pay when Medicaid is stripped and taken? How much will that help you when you don't have a job and you're looking for a job a year, 18 months? How long will that last? Whilst that 1% get richer and they do not care. What does that mean when we talk about that Riviera? Yeah? Oh, that land doesn't look so good. Why would anyone want to live there? Well, you just bombed the shit out of it for over a year. You sent billions to a genocide and leveled it of the very land which was theirs to be in. And then we come back to, again, the increase of wealth and that keeping of colonial power. And that little probably conversation that went behind the background to say, don't worry, I'll sort your problem for you. And I'll say to a number of people, a number of Arabs lined up to vote for Trump because he said he was going to sort it. He meant he was going to sort it for him. Look at the Trump real estate blues that happened. But look at the potential and what he has to take over and build real estate and build a Riviera there. Don't forget his 101 on real estate investing and the little relationships that he set up. So after presidency, he could have a little nest egg of coin, and he could have a little nest egg of real estate. Money, money, money. It's a rich man's world. So all of this is about supremacy, and all of this is about patriarchy. Now, I did say, and I did promise, we did history. We went a little bit in depth into the US, but they're not the only ones to use this before.
Receive a proper answer then. Maybe Dodgy Dave will answer it now. And by the way,
many people will remember this moment from the House of Commons in UK politics, and he actually got thrown out of the House, and he meant what he said. So when we talk about free speech, it's okay from one side, but when we start calling it what it is, and we start calling it dodgy politics, for some reason it's not acceptable. When one side is definitely doing something dodgy and everyone can see it, but we can do nothing about it, or we think we can't because we think that we don't have power. But we need agency, we need organization, and we need activism, another word that has been banned in the Trump dictionary. Let's keep with that perspective when we talk geographically. See, whether it be in the NHS, we've been talking about 50 million scheme to pull all patients scrapped. It's not been seen as efficient. This 13 billion waste within. But when we're coming into dodgy PPE and it's contracts going out to your mate, it's okay. So where exactly does that waste sit? We take from one part and we're calling it efficiency and effectiveness, but we're giving to our mates on the other side. And don't forget that connection with Musk and his 277 million funding of the campaign. He's a mate. But let's take it from over here. Biggest trick. And then we've had the giveaway before. It's the same old tactics. We've had the giveaway for the 1% in the budget. But we'll see in a minute what that actually meant. And it's quite interesting of how that narrative is coming back into the US politics as we see it now. But going further afield, because I do listen to French news, Danish news, Swiss news, English news in multiple languages, and it's super interesting on how this enriches your perspective and the lens of these messages being played out. The Danes in itself as well have gone through that, and they've gone through inefficiencies, buying trains from the Italians, having trains that don't work. But when they bought the trains from the Italians, they were not fit for the platform. So they scrapped millions of trains. They spent out on millions, but they spent millions that did not work. So no one's questioning the waste. But do you know where the waste actually comes from? You can bring people in at the top, but there's what I call this iceberg of ignorance. People are not asking people at the bottom who are shouting and saying, hey, we should do this. Do you know when you go and speak to the engineers, the call center people, the people on the shop floor, and you really go and listen to them, they will tell you what your problems are. They've been shouting about them for a very long time, but often the leadership at the top are not listening. How many companies I've gone and worked with, and initially they have never spoken. And in my programs, they go down and they sit down and they have coffees and they listen and they understand what's working, what's not working. What should we start, stop, change, continue? They will tell you, and this is transformation. Some of it is technical and some of it is cultural. And these are things that you need to listen to and change, and then you will get your savings. The way that we're going, there's this blind-sidedness of these cuts from the 1%, which are very short term and for shareholders. And they're not necessarily bringing what's needed. And then actually we have the shareholders coming in and questioning it. And it's very difficult to get your trust back from your employees and trust back from your customers. Coming on to trust, or trust. Freudian slip, but a little bit accidental. Let's think. You've actually brought trust into US politics. Let's have a listen and then give you a little bit of an education if you do not understand who this woman is.
Patriotic Brits have had enough. They've had enough. And we look across the Atlantic with envy. We see President Trump in the Oval Office signing off executive orders, and we want some of that in Britain. We want drill, baby, drill. We want men banned from women's bathrooms and women's sports. We want illegal immigrants deported. We want taxes to be cut. We want a Trump revolution in Britain. We want to flood the zone. We want Elon and his nerd army of muskrats examining the British.
Now, there's only one thing that I agree with her on is rats, because rats do sound a little bit dodgy. But let me just tell you, this woman, she is not elected by the people. She lasted 44 days. 44 days, and she tanked our economy. So when she tries to divide, and she also refers to, and if you listen to the whole speech, she picks up on the populist message of flooding, which is a little bit about Bannon's chaos theory of just bringing in a whole load of changes, that we cannot deal with everything and you eventually get what you want. So there's a strategy behind that. She picks up on hate speech, very much like VP Vance. She picks up on misogyny. She picks up on the divides and the divisions between West and East, between different races. She picks up on Pakistani, as if there's no instances of white crime, there's no instances of white rapes, no instances of white violence, of which there is. But I'm bringing that in because she's mentioning faith, she's mentioning religion, she's mentioning immigration, she's mentioning all of this division, which is harming people, and very populist language. And she's saying we want a Trump revolution. No, God, no. We are looking and we are like, we do not want this. Yeah, I'm not saying Britain does not have its issues, but this lady is not what you want. And it's quite interesting that you kind of scrape the bottom of the barrel in terms of someone that can come and speak on these issues, or you always tend to, because the other person you've had, and I'm waiting for them to roll back, oh God, is giving someone like Farage airtime. You scraped the bottom of the barrel before, hey, you might do it again. And he's even admitted to his biggest mistake of populist messages that have come in before, to take us into one of the biggest failures that we've had, which is Brexit, or Brexit as we say. And that failure has led to the loss of around 460 million a week. And that failure has led to the loss of 469 million a week. A week, people, coming from the Financial Times. There was a great video, I'll try and find it again, put it in the leaks, but this graph shows it, where the underperformance of the UK economy on GDP, even if you take into account coronavirus, even if you take into account the sluggishness of the economy, we are underperforming by far. Why? Because we can't grow. We can't get into that trading bloc of Europe. We've come out. Every single rule has to be rewritten if we're coming from business of pharma, but we already had it. Every single small business is starting to look at, can we have a presence? I've got a friend who's in sourcing, and they've now got a presence in Switzerland, and had to fire people within the UK because they need a presence here so that they can trade. Anything or way of doing business they did before becomes more difficult. So they've actually shot a lot of businesses in the foot. They've shot people that had jobs in the UK in the foot. From an immigration point of view, they're lacking what they need. A lot of, for example, the Polish people have moved back. Poland's a great place to work. When I led digital for a global company, going into Krakow, Katowice, and the amount of talent there, absolutely amazing. But now, when the UK needs to go and build homes, they don't have enough people. And it's okay to say, yes, let's just go and, hire British, which anyway, by the way, what does that mean when you look at the huge colonialization that Britons went to elsewhere, brought back people from other lands into the UK to help it rebuild? What does that mean? But the whole process and the number of years of training up nurses, doctors, skilled bricklayers takes years. So we're missing out on talent. And this is what we mean when we talk about immigration. But we always point to the foreigner. Listen to the seeds of division on chaos and the seeds of division of where this starts. And please listen and learn from Bannon.
To average citizens, because they don't have to bear the brunt of it. They don't bear the brunt of the healthcare system in collapse. They don't bear the brunt of the education system in collapse. They're taken care of. To wit, they bring about the largest financial collapse in the country, and they're better off in 10 years. Why wouldn't you like this system? The system's working great for them. It's not managed decline for them. They're making more money on the way down than they made on the way up. And so that's where Trump is a rallying cry.
So Trump is a rallying cry, and what he is pointing to actually himself is capitalism. Bravo! But when he says we and they, as I've mentioned before, and I do go back to this video, is that he doesn't mean the foreigner, the immigrant, the black and brown people, the LGBTQIA people, or the woman that wants to be out of the patriarchy. His seeds of division is speaking to a certain base. So what is this all for? What is the agenda that he's trying to rally when he manipulates the social networks, when he has this rallying cry around Trump to bring these divisions and this hate speech together? Please read Project 2025, even if you need to see the other side. But what's even more terrifying is when you look at the strategies that have been previously posted on Project 2025 on how to go about this and the harm that this is doing. Listen to this.
We want the bureaucrats to be traumatically affected. We want, when they wake up in the morning, we want them to not want to go to work because they are increasingly viewed as the villains. We want their funding to be shut down so that the EPA can't do all of the rules against our energy industry because they have no bandwidth financially to do so. We want to put them in trauma.
This is frightening. So not only is there this strategy of chaos coming from Bannon, but this is a strategy of trauma. Yes, you heard that right, and someone laughed at that. Do you know what it means to put someone through trauma? Do you know what your body starts to do in fight or flight? That cortisol level that increases, that constant kind of fight or flight, where you get both mental and physiological impacts of what these people have been going through. These 70,000 plus people impacted, these 9.5, 10,000 possibly illegally fired on top. That flood of trauma into society on top of the hate to do what? And he started to mention it. We are distracting you so that you cannot have the capacity to focus on what you need to focus on the environment. Remember, the environment doesn't have a voice. Yeah? We need to take up the voice for the environment. So I can tell you as a black woman, this is something that I have faced again and again. And now it's just become visible as a tactic for what's in the workplace. And we are not even usually allowed to mention the word trauma. In fact, it's one of the very words banned. But I'm going to take the liberty, seeing as Project 2025 has said those people that are going through the diversity, equity, and inclusion rollbacks, yes, trauma is what is incurring. And we already have been on this mental health crisis. The increase of mental health, physiological issues is overwhelming society already. And who's paying the price in terms of the rising depression? Women. Women are disproportionately impacted in the patriarchy because we are feeling the effects of this. When someone's in the office, they're not listening to you, or they're saying, you know what, you might as well just come back when your child's a little bit older. I've got friends who work for hospitals here voluntarily, fluent German, and when a role comes up, they say, yeah, but you know, your husband's working for Google. You don't necessarily need a paid job. We've got plenty of other volunteers. You don't need a job. Because of course, she doesn't need her own salary, yeah? You're dependent on your man, aren't you? Let alone all of the other women going to doctors saying, it's because you're doing a man's job. These things are for real. You only need to be a woman speaking to your other friends within these. And these things do not come up into the domain because they're oppressed. There's an NDA here, an NDA there. The laws themselves are weak, and we're told, well, it doesn't really happen because we equal within the law. But what you're doing is actually, you know what? Thank you, you're helping us. You're helping us with this diversity, equity, inclusion rollback because we were never just imagining it. It's there. And we should be very frightened, though, that this is happening. But the fact that they're emboldened enough to say, we're doing this by strategy. Believe it. Believe it. And the next thing is that impacting is not only mental health, and women are impacted disproportionately by autoimmune diseases. We're triggered by this banned word of trauma. Arthritis, for example, 4 times more. This is not something we're making up, and it's having these impacts on society, which, by the way, if you were to look at this dodgy cost effectiveness, how much is that piling into health systems, social care systems with the maybe ability of not being able to work, lack of talent that you can actually go into in the workforce because you're not employing the great talent of women. But as I said, let's go a little bit into deeper diversity. It's not just women, and if you're intersectional, you know this. If you're black, brown, you would disproportionately and have always been affected. That hypertension that you're disproportionately affected by, it kills. We are in the WHO have reported chronic diseases affected by hypertension. And if you're black and if you're brown, you're more likely. And it's not because of your diet, by your salt, because I don't know about you, I'm one of the most healthy eating people. But I can tell you it's environment. And thank you for releasing that trauma environment. It's real. And that places into this flood of trauma. And the hoods are off by admitting of what's going on. Roll back a diversity, equity, and inclusion and this strategy of trauma. And all we're getting is the theatrics of the chainsaw, of these cuts. But behind the theatrics is a very serious message.
This is the chainsaw for bureaucracy. Chainsaw!
Fight, fight! Fight, fight! Fight, fight!
He sees that as a fight, and clearly for who when it comes to the division. So I'm speaking to the centre, those people that think it doesn't matter. I remember very clearly flying to the States the first time Trump was in, sitting down with my SVPs, my VPs, who wanted me to come over. I almost didn't because I didn't feel safe. And they wondered why. They were Republican voters, and I explained to them I did not feel safe. They looked shocked at me, shocked. Whatever happens in the States has a ripple effect across the world. And as we're seeing, and as I'm saying, it's more globally connected. These messages aren't just coming from the States. So when you're doing that and you think that you're just voting for this individual had a value set of anti-abortion, that's his perspective, it's his view. He's allowed to have his perspective. I'm allowed to have mine. It's a female right to make their own decision. But when you're also looking at things like, yes, I want to have efficiency, effectiveness, as I hope we are, or I am unveiling, really how much efficiency, effectiveness have you had throughout history? Reagan years, actually you tripled the deficit. And what are you really getting when you come to Musk coming in, and who is that actually coming for? When we come on to who is it actually coming for and what does it actually mean? And so the second part that's really interesting is under the forced mandates to return to office, which they keep trying for some time, this clearly, when that rep said, well, to come into the office and fear basically coming to work each day, to be in trauma. 51% of employees are still reluctant to come into the office. I wonder why. But here we have this disproportionate impact. 52% of women are disproportionately leaving the workforce in the return to work mandate. What does that mean when we've been trying to make sure we have these diversity of perspective, diversity of thought, this innovation in products and customers and market? Part of it is parental childcare, so 30% of women disproportionately affected by the need for caring versus 17% of men. So there is a carer piece, and we need to fix that equality in society. But let's face it, primarily, often it's still coming down to women. It's also disproportionately affecting disabled groups. We had 3.5% increase of disabled people being hired, being able to come back to the workforce because they didn't face the same barriers that they did in the workplace. And in the sudden rush to bring them back to the office, guess what? They haven't got the accessibility sorted. What does this mean for them? And no shocker here, 21% of Black people do not want to return to the office compared to 3%. There's a big gap. The numbers around hypertension, the numbers around autoimmune for women, they tell you the story of why, and it's not just to do with that dodgy department. Listen, see, and learn about what's happening. And if you really want people performing, it's about trust, it's about culture, and it's about providing a psychologically safe environment. And then there's the environmental impacts. We had reversed the number of cars that were on the road. We had reversed the money that was going to the large cities of London back into the local economies, which is just another way to think about how do we have more dispersed geographic economical stability. But no, we want it going into the 800 billion real estate. It's all about real estate. It's all about the 1%, going into the coffers of the 1%, into those pension funds. We will need and want it going back into there, according to them. So we have this negative onslaught of the press of people not working because they're from home, where in fact all the research shows the opposite. It shows productivity. But refreshing news comes globally. Hey, even from Australia, we have half of the employees not wanting to come back to the office and walking. It's really hard to recruit talent if you're not offering that culture of trust, if you're not offering psychologically safe space, and you're not actually valuing people for what they do versus a presence culture. But also there is the immediate danger and stir up of hate speech, which is having very human and harmful consequences from young to old. Meet Tatiana Williams sleeping in a van with her grandma, her kids, and 2 of those children not waking up. After contacting the government for help and being on a wait list for a very long time, where could the 8 million a day from Musk go to? Meet Jocelyn Royo, 11 years old. 11 years old in Texas, and receiving so much hate that she could no longer cope. For being born in another country, on her immigration status, that hate has filtered down to school. And an 11-year-old could no longer cope. She died on February the 8th. Rest in peace, Angel. Meet Sam Nordquist, a transgender man who was killed for just simply being who he was. Not only killed, but tortured for over a month, and then murdered by 5 people. It's not coincidental the amount of hate that's being stirred up for LGBTQI+, and especially transgender people. I'm going to put a link to one of the charities that I donate to help if you want to help, because the amount of safe spaces are becoming less. Meet Rebecca Marady, her dog and her wife, reporting her as stabbed inside her apartment after the stir up of hate speech about diversity, equity, and inclusion hires for the California fires, ranging from young and old, all linked to hate. The hate speech that the likes of Bannon, the likes of Vance, the likes of Truss, the likes of Trump, and a number of other right-wing components want unchecked. But that hate speech, unchecked, leads to consequences and leads to action. It's not that we can't take different pieces of information. We can't present both sides. Please listen to my video on that. But we do need fact-checking and we do need moderation, because the violence against marginalized people is only increasing as an impact. So is it all worth it? Because when we go to the DOGE effectiveness and efficiency, the cuts themselves are not being done with due process, which fundamentally means this is going to cost.
Let's play it. Do you have a theory about why you were fired?
I don't have a theory. Nobody's given me a reason. But you could speculate it's because of our independence, that the administration doesn't want to have inspector generals who by statute are independent.
I mean, the point of these guys...
That's the VA, the largest healthcare provider in the country.
Yes, at the VA, right? That's what he does. And these guys are also all lawyers, right? They are not going quietly into this good night. Today, Michael Missel, who's the man I interviewed in there, that IG, he's part of a group of inspectors general who are suing. There's a very clear protocol about how you fire an inspector general, and Trump and his allies did not.
As we hear, you can't just fire an inspector general. And so we are actually already getting into suings for not following the right process. And that is going to cost. So already take some of that 5,000 off your dividend. And that's not being calculated because we have a whole load of incompetent people with very little character finding out. Because we have the opposite from competent, the opposite from character, going into these establishments and not understanding what people are doing and not following due process and really not understanding transformation at all. Even more worrying, this was a shocker for me and it's gonna be a shocker for you, I'm sure, is the firing of people because they attend diversity and equity inclusion training. So it's not that they're running diversity and equity inclusion, which is saying they no longer want, but they're attending. And then wait for the shocker.
The audio.
My daily job is not working in DEIA, so I was wondering what was going on and could it be related to that? And my supervisor dug deeper into it and found out that it was related to that due to a 2-day training course that I took relative to DEIA.
He took the course that Trump brought in his administration, and now he's being punished for it. And then we have the misuse of personal data being taken up to arms. And the leaking of personal data.
Of Government Efficiencies website, defacing at least 2 pages after its rush launch this week. Critics hacked and defaced 2 pages of the newly launched DOGE website, leaving messages mocking its security. The messages were visible until Friday morning, but are no longer accessible through traditional navigation. According to 404 Media, the hacked pages were pulled data from an unsecured database accessed by outsiders. Experts also noted that the DOGE page does not appear to be hosted on government servers.
And we have fired departments actually needed. Departments affected who actually provide services from the environment to energy to Meals on Wheels to bird flu. These are people that you need. Maybe the 1% don't need them, but you need. And the Dogecoin value is a theatrical in itself. But it goes behind what might this be linked back to? And it's always history, and sometimes it's recent history. Just moving geography provides us with some lessons. So the last time we had this populist nightmare, and the biggest impact was Brexit. But when we dug behind it, Europe was bringing in legislation around tax avoidance. So yes, we've been negatively impacted, and it's a nightmare for people as they're now finding out in terms of the reduction in GDP, in terms of jobs, in terms of talent, and much more. So why? Well, number one is tax avoidance of that 1%. Make billionaires even more richer. People like Jacob Rees-Mogg can hide his money in the Cayman Islands. That tax avoidance legislation that was coming in, or the anti-tax avoidance legislation that was coming in from Europe, does not apply. So we had Brexit. Number two is ultimately at the crux of everything: power, 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 more power. And Trump is looking and eyeing up that third term. Trump's also signed a declaration that only him and the Attorney General can interpret laws. It's going to get very interesting but very scary when we look at this accumulation of power and more power. Now, hopefully, it's more than just the two women. Hopefully, we have more people standing up to a rule of law, standing up to no one is above the rule of law. And here we have the Trumps of all Trumps. When Musk talked in the Oval Office about removing that $2 trillion deficit and finding these savings and being able to give you back dividends so that you could get down to no inflation and get down to zero, only a couple of days later landed borrowing $4.5 trillion in order to give tax cuts. So we're going to say, give you less of the departments that you need and that benefit you, the 99%, and we're going to keep you happy with a $5,000 dividend check. But hey, over here, don't look what's going on over here. We're going to increase our borrowing to 4.5 trillion, which we said was an absolute problem. And we're going to give tax cuts to the billionaires. It's like a game of those cups where you need to keep looking at what's really happening. Read widely. Don't just look at one type of press, especially where they don't have to publish both sides. Listen, yes, but look at what's actually being done. Don't play into the theatrics of a chainsaw or a 5,000 check, but look at what is actually being done. Reducing $2 trillion in debt is, of course, a great move. I mean, most of the money for the US is funded by the Chinese, which is interesting how this relationship will continue if they keep on the way they do, divisioning the East, the West, as Truss had pointed out within her speech. But what we're seeing when we remove with one hand and we give with another to the billionaires, the 1%, is we are seeing an increase in poverty, an increase in child poverty, an increase of numbers of those becoming under the breadline in many countries. We are seeing an erosion of the middle class. And so at some point, it's quite interesting, who do they think will be able to afford all these things? That keeps the engine going. Maybe capitalism will destroy itself. Keep your eyes on the prize, people. Look at what's happening. If you want a more critical view, and one that expands in depth, sometimes throughout history and across geographies, tune in, subscribe, like, comment for an honest take, sometimes with a little bit of tongue and cheek. And remember, if you don't laugh, you'll cry.
Like I brought a bow and arrow to a gunfight. I'm out of my league, I didn't know what this would feel like. I can't help but feeling let down, deep in despair, like I'm praying to a God that's not even there. Now I'm on my knees one more time. I need you to take my pain and make it something beautiful. Take my sorrow, show me it's not mine to hold. If you're here with me in the waiting, if Somehow all my suffering reveals a piece of heaven. And there's a resurrection waiting for me on the other side. But standing where I am right now, how could I know if I'm ever gonna see another miracle? So I'm on my knees one more time. I need you to take my pain and make it something beautiful. Take my sorrow, show me it's not mine to hold. If you're here with me in the waiting, even when my heart is breaking, take my pain and make it something beautiful. Something beautiful. I want more than a breakthrough. I want you. I want you. I want more than a breakthrough. I want you. I want you. I want more than a breakthrough. I want you. I want you. I want more than a breakthrough. I want you. I want you to take my pain and make it something beautiful. Take my sorrow, show me it's not mine to hold. If you're here with me and waiting, even when my heart is breaking, take my pain and make it something beautiful. Something beautiful.